Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As a former teacher, I know how busy you all are, especially at the start of a school year. Our webinar today is called Read Live Basics. Some of you may be familiar with Read Live or even using the program, and some of you may be new. So our presentation will give you a big picture overview of the 4 programs included in the platform. For those of you who might be interested, Christy will drop a link to a free trial for the program into our chat. Now let's get started. The 4 programs included in Read Live are Read Naturally Live, Word Warm-Ups Live, 1-Minute Reader Live, and Read Naturally Live Español. We'll spend most of our time today talking about Read Naturally Live, as this is our flagship program and the one that most people start working with. But let's first talk about the Read Live platform. The Read Live platform is where our 4 programs are found. Read Live contains comprehensive research-based reading interventions, all of them developed by Read Naturally, which has a track record of more than 30 years of use in thousands of schools. The program has evolved through several formats. The programs in Read Live allow you to easily differentiate instruction in an RTI or MTSS model, and our online platform allows you to use Read Live anywhere, both in the classroom or in a remote learning setting. We're going to talk today about a reading strategy that helps students improve their fluency while supporting comprehension and vocabulary development. As we talk, however, please keep in mind there's much more to reading development than fluency, and the strategy you'll see here today is not intended to be a comprehensive reading program. The strategy should be used as one part of a structured reading program that also includes grade level instruction in phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, and comprehension. Now let's talk about fluency. We know that fluency is not speed reading. Fluent readers read orally with appropriate speed. I like to say they're not too fast and they're not too slow. And they also read with accuracy and proper expression. Non-fluent readers have difficulty in at least one of these aspects of reading. They tend to make mistakes, they read slowly, or they don't read with appropriate expression and phrasing. So why should we focus on fluency? Well, for many years, educators have recognized that fluency is an important aspect of reading. It is that bridge to comprehension. Reading researchers agree. There's over 30 years of research indicating that fluency is a critical building block of reading because it is directly related to comprehension. From the very beginning, Read Naturally programs have always been aligned with this research and based on the science of reading. But let's talk about what the research tells us. Here are the results of one study that show how oral reading fluency correlates highly with reading comprehension. To interpret this type of data, a perfect match would be 1.0. And as you can see, oral recall, retelling, filling in the blank, and question answering are all above zero point 0.6, which indicates a strong correlation. But oral reading fluency is by far the strongest with a 0.91 correlation. Many researchers have found that fluency is highly correlated with reading comprehension. That is, when a student reads fluently, that student is likely to comprehend what they are reading. Why is that? Well, Dr. S.J. Samuels, a professor and researcher well known for his work in fluency, put forth a theory called the automaticity theory. According to Samuels, people have a limited amount of mental energy. If you want to multitask or become proficient at a complex task such as reading, you first need to master the component tasks so you can do them automatically. For example, a reader who must focus his or her attention on decoding words may not have enough mental energy left over to think about the meaning of the text they are reading. However, a fluent reader who can automatically decode the words can instead give their full attention to comprehending the text. To become proficient readers, our students need to become automatic so they can pay attention to meaning. Let's try an activity. Those of you here today are automatic readers. And to illustrate just how automatic you are at reading, I'd like you to read the first 2 rows of these words. Ready? Begin. And you can stop. Great job. I'm sure that felt very easy for you to read, but now let's try this. Do not read the words and instead just name the colors of the letters that you see in each of the words. Ready? Begin. and you can stop. Did you find this task much more difficult? I would imagine that you did. Every time I've done this activity, everyone's like, oh my goodness, that was a lot harder to name the colors. And the reason why is because you're already automatic with these words. You can't stop reading the words even when you're trying not to read the words. Because you're an automatic reader, you can then put all of your mental energy into building meaning. Consequently, while you read, then you're able to do those fun things like comparing the characters, predicting the outcomes, and even doing a little soul searching. And that is what we want for all of our students. Picture for a minute a non-fluent reader. Take a moment and imagine what that student sounds like when they are reading. It's likely what you imagined was a student reading slowly, uncertain when they get to a sight word, reading word by word. They tend to ignore that punctuation and they make many errors. Now, all students do not read this way. In fact, a student who's already reading fluently and comprehending text does not need a supplemental reading intervention program. But for your developing readers or students who struggle with fluency, a supplemental reading program like Read Live can truly benefit the student. So, how will you identify which students need a reading intervention like this? Well, the simple answer is you just need to listen to your students read aloud. You know what a non-fluent reader sounds like. We just described one. There's also research, however, about reading rates that can enable you to be more precise in determining which of your students need a reading intervention. To identify your students, you can use the Hasbrook and Tyndall table to help you find out. This table shows the oral reading fluency norms for the 50th percentile in grades 1 through 6. It's based on the work of Jan Hasbrook and Gerald Tyndall. They combined data for hundreds of thousands of students to create the norms in this table. We know that words correct per minute at the 50th percentile in 6th grade and above will remain about the same. So if you're working with students older than 6th grade, you can feel comfortable using those 6th grade norms. As you look at this table, I want you to keep in mind, however, it's the trends of these numbers that are important, not the specific individual numbers. Now let's look at a third grader who is at the 50th percentile. In the fall, you can see they're reading 83 words correct per minute on average. And look across that row. What do you see happening? The number of correct words per minute is increasing throughout the year from fall to winter to spring. And you'll notice that same pattern occurs at each grade level. But now let's consider what happens to a third grade student with average fluency rates above the 50th percentile compared to a third grade student with average fluency rates below. That fairly proficient third grade student might have an average rate in the fall of around 104 words correct per minute and finish the year in the spring with 139. But that struggling third grade student may come in only reading 59 words correct per minute in the fall, reaching the average of 91 by spring. Do you see the problem? There is a big gap here. Even though both students made progress during the year, that end of the year struggling reader is still far below where that proficient reader was at the beginning of the year. Notice too, there is that ceiling beyond which we can't reasonably expect students to perform. Even the upper level students in the 90th percentile in the spring will not read much more than 200 words correct per minute. In fact, most students level off at 140 words per minute, as do most adults. When using these norms, you'll want to take a look at your students' fall, winter, or spring benchmark scores and compare them to this chart. If you have a student scoring on that screening tool 10 or more words below the 50th percentile, they'll likely need a fluency building intervention that supports comprehension and vocabulary. Important to note, though, some of your students may also need further diagnostic assessments to pinpoint additional areas of need, such as phonics and vocabulary. Before we move on, take a look at this table and find the norms for the students you work with. Remember, these grade levels are their actual grade level and not their instructional level. And for future reference, this table is found in your handout for this webinar. So now that we know which of your students will need help, will need this reading fluency intervention, how do you help them improve their fluency and ultimately their comprehension? Well, we know students become fluent by reading, and some students will learn to read fluently without explicit instruction. And for others, fluency will not develop in the course of typical classroom instruction. The National Reading Panel suggests that just encouraging your students to read independently is not the most effective way to improve their reading achievement, because too often, by Simply encouraging your at-risk students to read does not actually result in increased reading on their part, because what we know our at-risk students often do during sustained silent reading is they tend to pretend to read. I know in my classroom they would often grab a book with pictures that they could look at, or more often they were choosing a difficult book so they looked like their classmates and they just simply pretended to read. Now, this is a problem because in the 10-minute block of independent reading, even if your at-risk students are reading, they're reading more slowly than the other students. In that 10-minute reading period, your proficient reader who can read 200 words per minute silently could read 2,000 words. However, in that same 10 minutes, your struggling reader who's only reading 50 words per minute might only read 500 words. So even though the two students are spending the same amount of time reading, they're definitely not reading the same number of words. And consider how that disparity plays out over the course of a year. So what can we do? We know our at-risk readers need to read more, but just asking them to read on their own does not work. The National Reading Panel concluded an effective course of action is to explicitly teach your developing readers how to read fluently step by step. There are 3 research-proven strategies blended together in our Read Live program. We call it the Read Naturally strategy, and it includes teacher modeling, which occurs when a proficient reader models rate, accuracy, and prosody; repeated reading, which occurs when a student practices a passage multiple times; and finally, progress monitoring. In all Read Life programs, we progress monitor by giving students a specific individual goal. We tell them exactly how we will know when they've met the goal. We give them the means to measure how they're doing along the way towards meeting the goal, and we make it simple enough so that they know when they have met their goal. By doing this, students are motivated to practice reading the same story over and over again until they achieve mastery. So is how these pieces combine into a single powerful strategy that we use in Read Live. The student begins by getting a baseline for progress monitoring. They read the story for the first time to get what we call the cold score. It's a timed reading, and the resulting score represents the number of words the student read correctly in a minute. You'll see that graph down there at the bottom of your screen. That is where the score is recorded in blue. Teacher modeling occurs as the student reads along with an audio recording of the story, subvocalizing with the narrator until they're able to read the story without errors. Usually the student will read along 2 or 3 times depending on their age and ability. Next, the students repeatedly time themselves as they read the story aloud, using the scores to check progress. The student keeps reading the story until they can reach their individual goal rate. Once the student reaches that goal, they'll move on and they'll answer comprehension questions, and then they'll continue to practice or play wordtastic while they wait for their teacher. Finally, when they're ready, the teacher will listen to the student read. Students who read with expression, at the goal rate, make 3 or fewer errors, and answer the comprehension questions correctly will pass the story. Their hot score is graphed in red. Again, I'll draw your eyes down to the graph at the bottom of the screen, and that gives the student visual feedback on how much improvement they made by working through the story. Over time, the students should see gradual improvement in both their cold and their hot scores, which really leads to motivation. In combining these strategies in Read Live in this way, you will see dramatic results for your developing and struggling readers. So how do we know this strategy works? Well, we know because there's research showing its effectiveness. When Candace Einott, the reading teacher who developed this strategy, first combined teacher modeling, repeated reading, and progress monitoring, she wasn't sure how it would be, so she tried it out in a 3rd grade collaborative classroom. She used the strategy with her students with disabilities in Phase 1. According to the Hasbrook and Tyndall norms, 3rd grade students will typically make average weekly improvements of 0.8 to 1.2 words per week. I want you to remember that number. The students in Candace's group who were receiving the Read Naturally strategy gained an average of 2.35 words correct per week on cold, unpracticed readings, things they had never read before. The students who did not get the strategy were the Title I students, and they gained 1.23 words per week, which was more in line with those norms. However, in Phase 2, the Title I students received instruction using the strategy, and you can see that 13 weeks later, they showed an average fluency gain of 2.15 words correct per week on cold readings. Since the original results, there have been multiple other studies that have shown strong evidence for the Read Naturally strategy. Here are just 2 examples, but there are much more found on our Read Naturally website at readnaturally.com. Now let's talk about the 4 programs available in the Read Live platform. Read Naturally Live is our flagship fluency intervention. Word Warm-Ups Live is a separate phonics intervention. 1 Minute Reader Live is our structured independent reading program that offers reading practice for any student. And then Read Naturally Live Español is our Read Naturally Live program presented entirely in Spanish. Let's jump into Read Naturally Live first. Read Naturally Live focuses on fluency and phonics. Students benefit from additional support in vocabulary, spelling, and comprehension as they work through audio-supported steps to read each story accurately and fluently, and then they demonstrate their understanding by answering questions. Students benefit by working in Read Live as they are motivated to read short nonfiction passages and build their fluency. There's audio support, which helps them increase their reading accuracy and expression. Their comprehension and vocabulary skills become strengthened as they read and reread stories. They develop automaticity and decoding through targeted lessons in the phonics series. And they work independently most of the time. However, there are a few key teacher touchpoints, which I'll describe in a little bit. Students recognize their own improvement as they experience success in the program, improving their overall attitude toward reading. The Read Naturally Live includes 3 series. We have a sequence series, a phonics series, and an idiom series, with 13 different levels ranging from 0.8 to 8.0. The program is appropriate for students with reading skills between 1st through 8th grade, beginning readers through adults. To see your students make progress, they should work and Read Naturally Live in 30 to 45-minute sessions, 3 to 5 times per week. And of course, the more practice they get, the faster they will improve. This poster is found in your handout, and it will show each of the steps that we're going to discuss here in a minute that the students complete as they work through Read Naturally Live. Before we get into the steps, however, I want to reference I want to discuss that before the students begin, teachers can differentiate instruction for their individual students or groups of students by changing the story options. Possible changes teachers might make is turning off steps, adjusting time limits for steps, adjusting the number of read-alongs or practices required, and adding in Spanish read-alongs for your native speakers of Spanish and enabling recording features. Once you have set up story options for your students and they log in, they will land on the Select a Story page, and they also will go back here every time they have completed and worked their way through all of the steps. When the student is logged in on this screen, it will display a set of 12 out of 24 high-interest nonfiction stories. Notice some of those tiles are grayed out and they have a star. That just simply means the student already completed that one. There's a story counter that will show the student how many stories they have completed. And when students choose to work, or a student can choose to work on any story that hasn't already been passed. The student will choose the title to select the story and confirm that that is the one that they want to work on, and they will move to the next step, which is keywords. The keyword step teaches students key vocabulary words that are important to the story. The student has to click through each word to learn the definition and hear the word read in a sentence before they can advance to the next step. Above those keywords, you will see our progress bar at the top of the page. That simply indicates to both the student and the teacher what step the student is currently working on. When the student clicks on that very first word, you'll see this box appear, and the narrator will read the definition of the keyword, and they will use it in the sentence. After they work their way through all of the words, they will move to the important step of prediction. Students will write a prediction based on the keyword's title and the picture. Predictions we know are important for comprehension because they prepare the mind for reading by requiring the student to briefly think about the topic. What do they already know? The prediction screen provides a text box for writing a brief prediction, and there's a 2-minute time limit by default for the students to complete this step. There are options for teachers, however, if they're working with students who are not able to keyboard or don't have the skills to do that quite yet, where you can just simply have them enter a character into this box, and then instead of typing out their prediction, they can share their prediction with you during the cold timing. Notice how the screen turned red. That is telling the teacher this student is ready for a cold timing. It's a great visual for the teacher who's working with another student. They can just glance over and see that this student, Melissa, is waiting for the teacher and is ready for either a cold or hot timing. While they are waiting, however, they don't have to just sit. There's a wordtastic game that will give them an opportunity to play a vocabulary game appropriate to their reading level. Once the student has come over and they're ready, or once the teacher has joined the student, they'll click that gold Conduct Cold Timing button at the top. They will log in, and the students will, let me get back to the right screen, land on the cold timing page. In this step, the program times the student for 1 minute as they read the story for the first time. This timing provides a baseline for measuring improvement and begins the motivating process of progress monitoring. When ready, the student clicks Start Timing and then reads the story aloud as the teacher listens. An optional reading guide can be used to highlight as the student reads. The teacher will coach the students to notice if they stop, stumble, or want to skip a word, and in such cases, the student simply clicks on that difficult word to hear it pronounced. Those words will be deducted from the score as errors. The teacher will guide the student through this cold timing by prompting them to click on those difficult words, and by default, this step requires a teacher to be present. We highly recommend that the teacher is present for both the cold timing step as well as the quiz step, because we have a feature named Data Mentor, which will, if those two steps are present, provide the data that will allow us to make recommendations on whether a student's level or goal should change. When the student reaches the end of the story, they will simply click either finished, or if they don't reach the end of the story before the timer sounds, they will click the last word that they read and move on to the next step. They will see a graph that will start the progress monitoring process by this showing the students the number of words they read during that cold timing, as well as you can see there in the middle of the screen, the reading rate goal that the student must meet to pass the story. This information is valuable for monitoring progress over time, and it also acts as a powerful motivator for the student. Next, the students move into the teacher modeling step, which we call read along. The student reads aloud quietly with a recording of the story, and this step helps them learn the unknown words and practice the difficult words. Modeling also encourages proper pronunciation, expression, and phrasing. Students can click on any of the blue vocabulary words to hear them pronounced and to listen to a definition. And a Spanish read-along option is available for some of the levels. Students will click Start Read Along to begin, and they'll read the story aloud quietly with the narrator, not their neighbor, their narrator. Typically, the students read along 3 times, but your older students may only need to read along once or twice. Younger students, however, and some students with disabilities may benefit from reading along more than 3 times. That is one of the options that you can adjust in the story options set part of the program. After they are finished with the read along, they're going to move on to the practice step. This is the repeated reading step where the student conducts 1-minute timings for each practice, reading the story without the narrator. This step helps the student improve their fluency, master those difficult words, and gain a deeper understanding of the story. Students will click Start Timing to begin their first practice, and they'll read the story aloud quietly, clicking on any words that they don't know to hear it read. Any word the student clicks on will be deducted from their practice score. For a 1-minute practice timing, the student simply clicks the last word they read when the bell sounded. And over there below the picture of the zebra, you can see the number of words the student read correctly. It is displayed in the scores box. The student must practice until they are able to read the story at or above their goal rate. By default, a student must practice at least 3 times, even if they meet the goal earlier, but the teacher can reduce the number of practices required if they so choose. The next button down there in the bottom of the screen will become enabled once the student has met the requirements for this step. And then they will move on to the quiz questions. We know the goal of reading is comprehension, so in the quiz step, the student will answer several questions to evaluate their comprehension of the story. The number and type of questions will vary based on the level and the series that the student is working in. The student will answer the questions as they're displayed on the screen, and they can always refer to the story on the left-hand side of their screen for help. Software will correct most of the answers, however, the teacher will be responsible to evaluate any open-ended questions when they meet the student during the pass step. Once all of the questions have been answered, the student simply will click Next to advance to the retell step. We know that retelling is another key important way to help students with their comprehension. It helps them to comprehend, remember, and retell a story. So the program will ask the students to retell the story in their own words, and the students have the option to click that Review Story button on top of the text box to read the passage again or refer back to it as they are writing that retell. Teachers can certainly make accommodations to this step for students who might have issues with keyboarding or writing. In fact, this step is turned off by default for any students working in level 3.0 or below, but you will always have the option to turn that step on for students or turn that step off for students based on individual student needs. When students have completed their retell, you can see the screen is turned red again for that cue to the teacher that this student is ready. And while waiting for the teacher, they can either continue to practice the story or play that wordtastic vocabulary game again. When the teacher is ready, she'll come over to conduct the hot timing by clicking Conduct Past Activities and logging in. During the pass and the hot timing step, the student will sit at the computer with the teacher. And when ready, they'll click Start Timing and begin to read aloud. While the student is reading aloud, the teacher will just be quietly counting any errors that they make. The student will read until the timer sounds, and when they're finished, the teacher will enter the number of errors that the student make. They will then see the student's timing score in words correct per minute, and the teacher will rate the student's expression on a scale from 1 to 4, with 4 being the highest score. If you're ever wondering what does a 1, 2, 3, or 4 look like, that informational icon right there will give you a rubric that will describe for you what each of those scores would represent. Progress monitoring is reported out then as the student is presented with a new graph showing their cold and hot timing scores. Notice the cold timing score is in blue and the hot timing score is in red. Students find this visual very motivating, and teachers appreciate the progress monitoring that is built into the program with this step. When students get to the retelling, or when teachers get to the retelling part of the past step, they will review the student's retell and answer and review any of their open-ended questions. This screen right here is a simple example of the student's retelling of the story, and you'll notice that the teacher will determine whether the student met their expectation. When they're done with the retell review, they will simply click Next, and they will get to this Past Review screen. Under the Past Results heading, each item listed has a star. This indicates that the student has passed all of the requirements for the story, which you can see there on the right-hand side of your screen. If any of your students do not meet one of these requirements, you will have the option to have them go back and repeat that if you so choose to have them do that work. And the final screen is a congratulations page. Some music will play, and the students will receive gold medals and blue ribbons based on their performance, their accuracy, their story goal, their expression, the quiz, as well as the retell. The student is now ready to select a new story and start the process again. I want to share with you today a new feature that was recently added to Read Naturally Live, and it's called the Periodic Assessment of Fluency. We call it PATH for short. PATH provides a streamlined method for teachers to measure the oral reading fluency of a student working in Read Naturally Live. It allows teachers the option to conduct 1-minute timings to measure a student's words correct per minute score at multiple points during the school year, using a consistent set of passages at the same level that the student is assigned to work and Read Naturally Live in a given school year. You will see an alert represented by that red bell on the student login page, and you will also see it present in the top of the blue bar at the top of the Select a Story screen. That is a nice visual clue for you as the teacher to know an assessment is available for this student. The process is very similar to conducting a cold or hot timing. The teacher simply listens to the student read for 1 minute, counts the number of errors, and then inputs that number so the program can calculate their words correct per minute score. Ideally, the teacher will conduct 2 valid timings so that PATH can then average those 2 scores. However, if only 1 valid timing ends up being completed, PATH will save that single score. Ideally, you'll complete this assessment in one sitting with your students, so just kind of plan to have a few minutes to get this done with them at one time. An example of a report that represents a student's performance on the periodic assessment of fluency throughout the entire school year, you can see on your screen right now. You'll notice that it gives the mean score for each of the times that the assessment was completed at those 10-week intervals, and the number of valid timings that it took to get that mean score. And then a really important thing to notice is how many stories was the student completing each week between those PAF assessments. And you can see that once that student was completing 2.6 stories per week, their score really ended up increasing. I'm going to ask Christy to just drop a link to a blog post into our chat, and this will give you a lot more details on this new feature. Now we're going to move on. That's going to wrap up the information I will share today about Read Naturally Live, and we'll just take a very brief look at Word Warm-Ups Live. Word Warm-Ups Live is our phonics intervention that is, of course, included in the Read Live platform. And if you want to learn more about it, we have recorded webinars and trainings available on our website that will go into more depth about this program. Word Warm-Ups Live is our phonics intervention, but also provides students with additional support in fluency, spelling, and phonemic awareness. Students work through audio-supported phonics lessons as they build automaticity in decoding. There are many benefits for students who work in Word Warm-Ups Live. They improve their word recognition skills. As they practice reading words with specific phonics patterns with audio support, they build that automaticity in decoding. They learn to decode increasingly difficult phonetically regular words, and they also have opportunities to read the words with featured patterns in connected texts. Phonics skills are reinforced as your students are required to spell phonetically regular words. Word Warm-Ups Live includes 3 levels. Level 1 reinforces first and second grade level phonics skills using one-syllable words. Level 2 uses 2-syllable words to build automaticity in reading compound words, words with a variety of syllable patterns, and words with prefixes and suffixes. And Level 3 focuses on multisyllabic words. This program is appropriate for students whose reading skills are at a 1st through 4th grade reading level, and it's also appropriate for beginning readers to adults who need to work on these skills. Students receiving Tier 1 instruction can work in Word Warm-Ups Live for 10 minutes per day as a daily warm-up to reinforce and practice the skills they are learning in their core program. Students receiving Tier 2 and 3 intervention should work in Word Warm-Ups Live for 20 to 30 minutes sessions each day. Again, the more practice students get, the more quickly they're going to improve. To place your students automatically in one or more Read Live programs to address their phonics needs, we now have a Read Live phonics and word analysis assessment available. This is another new feature for this new school year. This assessment covers everything from letter sounds to advanced multisyllabic words. Each skill area includes 5 to 6 test items, and Read Live recommends a stopping point when a student scores below 80%, making it easy to identify where instruction should begin. Using the student's data, Read Live will recommend a placement assignment for the student in a Read Naturally Live phonics level, a Word Warm-Ups Live section, or a Read Naturally Live sequence level in combination with a Word Warm-Ups Live section. If the teacher accepts the program's recommendations, the student's placement assignment will update for them automatically. To access the assessment, the teachers will simply choose Teacher in the top of the blue bar, which will then show the teacher menu, which you can see on your screen. From the teacher menu, the teacher will choose Assess Phonics and Word Analysis, which is at the very bottom. And I want you to notice there are 2 drop-downs available. If you're wondering if your students have letter sounds knowledge, you can simply start by assessing letter sounds. If you already know your students have their letter sound knowledge, you can then choose Assess Decoding Skills. Based on what you know about your students, you determine the starting point. If I were to choose Assess Decoding Skills, this is the screen that I will see. The program will suggest a starting point, and you can go with the suggested starting point or adjust the starting point by using the Assessment Level and Skills to Assess dropdown, which is outlined there in red. Notice to the right of your screen there are support materials available, assessment instructions, student copy of assessment. That's if you want your students to be reading from a paper copy rather than on the computer screen. And then a phonics skills and assignment options PDF, which shows how the students' phonics needs align within Read Live programs. You can also access a child's Read Naturally Live assignment history below those by choosing one of those 2 buttons. When you're ready to begin, you'll simply choose Start Selected Assessment. This slide is an example of a Level 1 Section C question. The students will read from the left side of the screen, and the right side of the screen is where you as a teacher will score the student's response and make any necessary notes. If you choose correct, the response box will fill with the correct answer. If you choose incorrect, you might type into that box what the student said. Maybe they said rad instead of raid. And then you can go ahead and include any notes there, and this information will show up on the report. When the students have completed the assessment, you'll see a screen that will make a recommendation for Word Warm-Ups Live. For this particular student, it's Word Warm-Ups Live Level 1, Section D, with a wordless goal of 40. And you can see after the line, it says that that is the recommended place for the student to begin working. This is a nice example of a report. It's one of the many benefits of administering this phonics and word analysis assessment, because you can access this report and use this not only as a data collection, but also a way to communicate with others that are working with the student or with the parents, because each time you administer the assessment, you will see the student's original results and then the last 3 most recent responses as you have reassessed the students. And it's a great way to show student growth on their specific phonics skills. Christy is going to also drop a blog post in the chat, a link to a blog post in the chat to give you more information about this feature. This is the Word Warm-Ups Live poster that walks through each of the steps that the students will complete as they work through a Word Warm-Ups Live exercise, and this poster is also found in your handout. Now let's take a look at 1 Minute Reader Live, which is our independent reading program. 1 Minute Reader Live focuses on fluency, and students benefit from additional support in vocabulary and comprehension. 1 Minute Reader Live is a highly structured, independent reading program with questions and activities that support both vocabulary and comprehension. Students are engaged in self-directed learning because they complete 1 Minute Reader Live independently. They expand their knowledge base as they read interesting nonfiction text. They're provided with audio support that helps them to learn new words and improve their expression. Their fluency develops and their vocabulary and comprehension skills are strengthened. And as they experience success, their attitude towards reading grows and becomes stronger. Students gain confidence as they complete their various activities, and they recognize their success on their graphs, which, as you can see, are very similar to the Read Naturally Live cold and hot timing graphs. There are 6 reading levels in 1 Minute Reader Live, going from early first grade through mid 5th grade, E through 5. Each level includes 8 books with 5 nonfiction stories organized around a specific theme. So there is a lot of content for your students to practice reading. The program is appropriate for students who are beginning readers through mid 5th grade, and you can also use it with beginning readers all the way through adults that are learning to read. 1 Minute Reader Live is appropriate for students of all ages who would benefit from a structured independent reading. A student working in Read Naturally Live can also work in 1 Minute Reader Live for some extra independent reading practice. And a student who's about to graduate from Read Naturally Live might first transition to 1 Minute Reader Live to work independently for the teacher to feel comfortable that, sure, I can definitely let this student graduate from the program. Another great use of this program is to use Read Live or to use 1 Minute Reader Live while you are setting up Read Live with your other students. If you're conducting some placement tests, all the other students in your room can be working in 1 Minute Reader Live independently. 1 Minute Reader Live can be used, as we said, as an independent structured reading program. It can be assigned, excuse me, for at-home reading, and it's also good to send home the logins, excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat, as a summer reading program. Here is an example of the different levels that are available in 1 Minute Reader Live, and I would draw your attention to this slide that is also included in your handout. Sometimes people want to know, how does Read Naturally Live compare with 1 Minute Reader Live? Well, you can see there's different uses where 1 Minute Reader Live is highly independent. Read Naturally Live is going to need the teacher. There's different content levels available. There's the row that discusses about how the teacher is involved, but there are reports available for monitoring progress in both of those programs. And there is also included in your handout an example an example of our steps poster for 1 Minute Reader Live that will show you more specifically what the students do as they work through the program. And we're going to wrap up today by talking about Read Naturally Live Español. Read Naturally Live Español is our Read Naturally Live program in Spanish. It helps students build their fluency in Spanish as they read short nonfiction passages. They're provided with full audio support in Spanish, which helps students increase their accuracy and their expression. They gain comprehension and vocabulary skills in Spanish. They'll work independently most of the time, but as they experience as they experience success, the student's attitude towards reading will improve. I want to show you by taking a brief zoom in here on what a passage will look like in Read Naturally Live Español. As you can see, all of the text is in Spanish, and the audio support provided to your students is also in Spanish. There are 10 levels of content in Read Naturally Live Español spanning from 1.0 to 5.6. As I mentioned, all content and instructions for the student are in Spanish. The student, though, will also have access to instructions in English. When the teachers are interacting with the students, there is an English teacher menu, and the past review screen can be viewed in either Spanish or in English as the students and the teacher meet to work together. Read Naturally Live Español is appropriate for students whose reading skills are between 1st and 5th grade level in Spanish, with an intervention range of beginning readers through adults. It's appropriate to use in a variety of scenarios. It's appropriate for a native Spanish speaker to develop their Spanish reading skills. It's also appropriate for native Spanish speakers to support their vocabulary and comprehension while they're learning to read in English. And finally, it's appropriate for native English speakers to learn to read Spanish text fluently as a second language. And of course, to see students make progress, they should be working in this program 30 to 45-minute sessions, 3 to 5 times per week. To see a comparison of Read Naturally Live and Read Naturally Live Español and how they are different, I'm just going to draw your attention in the interest of time to this slide, which is available in your handout. On page 21. The poster shows the steps that the students work through for each exercise in Read Naturally Live Español, and you'll see that the steps are very similar to the steps that they follow in Read Naturally Live. So that is a big picture look at the 4 programs included in Read Live. We talked about Read Naturally Live, our fluency building program, Word Warm-Ups Live, which is phonics. Of course, they all focus though and support vocabulary and comprehension. 1 Minute Reader Live and Read Naturally Live Español. We have many resources available if you need additional assistance in the future. On readnaturallylive.com, if you go to our Read Live help page, there's a wonderful resource that will give you how-to videos, student guides, links to a Smart Start guide, as well as the user guide and the Read Naturally Live Teacher's Manual. Again, that is found on readnaturallylive.com. We're not going to have time to take any questions today, but on your screen you can see the Read Naturally's contact information. Please don't hesitate to contact us with further questions or if you need any support. If there are any questions that were landed in the chat that Christy wasn't able to answer during the webinar, we'll be sure to answer those via email in the next couple of days. So I want to thank you for joining us for this Read Live Basics webinar. I'm going to wish you a wonderful school year.